Good evening and welcome to episode 97 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Uzamantungwa Khumalo. I actually can't believe we have gotten to episode 97. I'm sure a lot of you at home know that we're doing our countdown to episode 100. You're just going to have to stay tuned in and in store to find out what we've got in store for you for episode 100. You know that we've got something big in store for you. I have been talking about how excited the team and I are about episode 100 and some of what we want to offer you. Well, it is the Monday edition of the Private Property Podcast and we're talking property. I do hope that you have had a great weekend. You're staying home, you're staying safe, you're sanitizing your hands, social distancing. I know if you're a Kaizer Chiefs fan, you are probably gutted right now, as I am. I feel as though the league is just not going to be ours. I really do wish that Kaizer Chiefs did a better job of holding on. But we'll see if things can maybe turn around miraculously somehow. But besides that, let us know how your weekend was. I think that was probably the one dampening thing about this weekend. And of course, now to talk property, which is something that I know a lot of us, especially if you are a fan of the Private Property Podcast, are very passionate about. This evening, we're talking about the 4 tips for new property owners in community schemes. Now, a lot of new buyers are very likely going to be buying their first property in community schemes. Investors are also very likely to be buying their properties in community schemes. And there are always certain things that you want to make sure you know and understand before you buy into a community scheme. Or if you've already bought into one, that you begin to familiarize yourself with, because you're going to very likely be staying there for a couple of years. To better understand this one, she is no stranger to the Private Property Podcast. I was saying to her that she's becoming a really great regular, and of course, love having her on. And of course, that is Zelinda van der Merwe, who is the co-founder and director at TVDM Consultants. Good evening, Zelinda. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Hi there, Zama. Thank you so much for the opportunity again. I'm looking forward to it.
So, I think let's look at what new owners should be knowing about community schemes. Because I think this is one of those things we know that, especially right now, a lot of new time or first time home buyers are going to be buying into community schemes. We're seeing a lot of them being constructed, essentially all across the country. I mean, in Gauteng, the construction is quite insane. And a lot of people probably have never lived in a community scheme. Some perhaps have, but many, especially in more urban areas, perhaps very likely haven't. Migration trends are very different, but this is now essentially something that is a big trend and the way that a lot of us are going to be living going forward. Perhaps give us that first tip for new homeowners in community schemes. What is that thing that we certainly do need to know before we get into a community scheme, or if we're in one and perhaps it's the new time that we're in it, what is that thing that we should be mindful of?
So it's going to sound quite strange, but the first thing is to make sure that you're actually buying into a community scheme, or to check that you are. And the reason I say that is very often people think that they're buying into a freestanding property. Meantime, it's a security enclave or a homeowners association. They think that they're buying into a homeowners association, but meantime, it's a sectional title scheme. A sectional title scheme is not necessarily a block of flats. A homeowners association is not necessarily a security estate or a gated estate. Community schemes are all different. Very often if you of a certain generation, you're looking to buy into a retirement development, and then you think that you own your property, meantime you're purchasing into life rights. So that's important to look at. You might actually be a first-time purchaser in a community scheme when you're at your retirement age already, moving from the house in the suburbs to the retirement development. So knowing that you're buying into a community scheme and understanding the nature of the community scheme is probably the most important thing. And then especially looking at the times in which we are, the financial management of the scheme is also vitally important. And I'm sure that we'll touch on that a little bit later in the show as well. But for the first and most important thing, most certainly, you're buying into a community scheme and what is the nature of that community scheme.
And that's such an important one, Zelinda, because I'm sure a lot of people are probably thinking, okay, we've spoken about community schemes here in the Private Property Podcast. We know that there are different types. Perhaps very briefly, just take us through, those different types. Because I know you and I have had this conversation with our viewers at home, but there are probably new viewers who are thinking, okay, I definitely missed that episode. So just briefly, what are the, high level, the different types and the differences in them?
So the Community Schemes Ombud Service Act right at the beginning actually defines what a community scheme is. And a community scheme can be a body corporate or a sectional title scheme. That's your block of flats, for example, sometimes a townhouse complex. Then you get a homeowners association or a property owners association, and that's your gated community or your gated estate, security estates. However, it doesn't necessarily have to be gated. It doesn't have to have boundary walls and fences around it. It could be an enclave where the roads are public, but you contribute towards a common interest, for example, security. You have harmonious aesthetics, for example, architectural guidelines. You get share block developments that aren't as popular as they once were, and most of them are under the transition to sectional title or have become sectional title. And then, of course, the retirement developments, which can be life rights, they can be sectional title, they can be homeowners associations. So there's quite a few different community schemes, and that's why it's so important to know exactly what you're getting yourself into. And of course, each one of them are governed differently as well.
Mm-hmm. And then what would you then say, Zelinda, is that the second tip that you give to new property owners? Because now the first thing is to know that you're actually buying into a community scheme. And then we've, looked at briefly just the different types. And I think to viewers at home who want to have a better sense of the different types and what they mean, I will urge you, of course, to buy your copy of the Private Property Guide. And that is a book. And if you want to find out more details on where you can get it, you can go to www.thepropertyguide.co.za. It has a chapter that looks at community schemes, the different types of community schemes, and essentially the rules and regulations of the different types of community schemes. And that will really help you as a first-time buyer in understanding what it is that you're buying into. And for you to also be able to ask your estate agent, is this a homeowners association, or what kind of community scheme is it, so that you better understand what exactly it is that you're about to buy into before you sign on the dotted line. So then, Zelinda, what would you say is the second tip for new property buyers?
So we touched on it briefly, and that's in regard to the financial management of the community scheme. And in preparation for this evening session, I chatted to my husband, who's a property investor. I chatted to my co-founder, who's a property investor, and I spoke to them and I said, what really rang the bell for you when you were looking at buying into property, either to live or to invest? And in both instances, they spoke about the financial affairs of the body corporate. So, and when I say body corporate, I'm talking generally about the community scheme. You look at the annual financial statements, the budget, in a sectional title scheme, the maintenance, repair and replacement plan, the reserve fund, having a look at the minutes of the last annual general meeting to see what important decisions were taken, having a look at the trustee meeting minutes. And then, of course, the annual financial statements are good at giving you a bit of an understanding of from where the community scheme came. In other words, any big decisions that were taken, any effects on the scheme. And then, of course, the budget looking forward. What is the levy? What type of expenses there are? And very often when I speak to potential buyers in community schemes, or even current owners, they say, oh, but you know what, the scheme next door looks pretty much the same as ours. They've got a swimming pool, we've got a swimming pool, they've got a managing agent, we've got a managing agent, but their levies are, half the price of ours. Why are our levies so high? And that is such a dangerous thing to do. The saying, you must compare apples with apples, or oranges with oranges, whatever it might be. You can't simply say, well, one body corporate has to have exactly the same levies as another. It all depends on the expenses of the body corporate, the history of the body corporates. So perhaps the scheme next door is a relatively new one. Perhaps they've just gone through a whole lot of maintenance that isn't required. Perhaps the scheme that you're in does need a whole lot of maintenance, or is a bit older, or has a little bit more expenses. Perhaps the insurance premiums are a lot higher because of a lot of claims in the past. There's so many nuances in regard to the specifics of the scheme when you look at the financial affairs that one can't simply take a blanket view to say levies are high or not. And I think especially now people are very cognizant of what they're paying for their levies, what are they getting back from the body corporates, and wanting to understand exactly what they contribute towards and what they're responsible for. My colleague in the industry, Mike Addison of Adjudication, gave me some good advice this evening as well. He said, tell the owners or the potential purchasers to request a schedule of replacement values, because obviously their bond financing is going to be dependent on that. And perhaps if they are paying too much, the sum insured is too high, they can ask the bank to actually reduce the payments. So people are looking at every single opportunity that they have to actually bring their expenses in regards to their homes down and their investments down. And we'll chat about investments a little bit later as well when you're an investor owner. But the financial affairs of any community scheme, a homeowners association, body corporate, what have you, is vitally important before you buy in, to understand what you're getting yourself into. And special levies as well is another big one, because the purchaser is responsible for whatever portion of the special levy that's going to be raised during their time of ownership when the property is registered. It's very important to ask the question about when last was a special levy raised. Is a special levy currently on the go? What is the period of a special levy? I mean, a special levy can be raised over a short period like 3 months, or it could be raised over a period like 3 years or 5 years. So you need to understand exactly what you're getting yourself in for as a member of that community scheme.
Zelinda, you're showing that, a colleague of yours, Mike, said one of the things that he would say people must ask, or owners must ask, is the schedule of replacement values, because it's going to be required, certainly for financing purposes. Perhaps share with our viewers what that is, because, we can't take it for granted that all of us understand some of these things that go behind the scenes when it comes to the properties that we're buying or selling or renting.
So I think to start off with, one has to understand what you own in a sectional title scheme specifically. You own your section as well as your undivided share of the common property, and that is based on your participation quota. And the participation quota is calculated by looking at the square meterage or floor area of your section in relation to everybody else's floor area in the scheme. And that is what your insurance replacement values is also based on. Now, under the new legislation, the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act, I keep on calling it new, but it's been around since 2016. It's not new anymore. It's actually 4 years old in October, interestingly. Yeah. Makes me feel ancient, but it speaks about the body corporate now requiring a valuation done every 3 years. And as part and parcel of that, you look at the valuation of the units, and the units, the valuation rather, or the replacement valuation is going to be, what is it going to cost to build this building again? What is it going to cost to reinstate it? And of course, you as an individual owner are going to pay a little bit more towards your insurance if you have the gold taps and the marble countertops and all that fun stuff, because the bank is going to require that insurance to be a bit higher. But generally, when we speak about the insurance replacement valuation, we're speaking about it in the context of the building and each of the units. And that, of course, is based on your participation quota. It's not your market valuation. It's not your municipal rates valuation. It is what will it cost today to rebuild this building if something had to happen to it.
Okay. So now, Zelinda, we understand the finances of the body corporate, or the community scheme rather, that we're going to be buying into, or potentially buying into. What is then the third tip that you would give to new property owners who are going to be buying in community schemes?
Look at the governance documents. So look at the rules, the estate rules, if you're in a homeowners association, the conduct and the management rules, if you're in a body corporate, look at the life rights agreements, if you're buying into a life rights retirement development, or the use agreement in a share block scheme. You have to understand exactly what your rights as well as your responsibilities are in a community scheme. And very often we forget that along with rights come responsibilities, and we simply want, and we want the body corporate to give, but it's not as simple as that. Very often in my consulting practice, I'm faced with a situation of somebody asking for forgiveness afterwards as opposed to permission before. And it's very easy to ask for forgiveness afterwards as opposed to permission when it comes to renovations or bringing a pet into the scheme. That is a big one. Buying into a scheme knowing, for example, that pets are not allowed, or buying into a scheme knowing that short-term letting is restricted, and then after the fact, obviously trying to fight it and dispute it. And we speak a little bit about buyer beware. You have to understand, acknowledge, and agree to the contents of the governance documents, although you become automatically bound by them and to adhere to them. But you need to understand exactly what the management structure is about, what you're allowed to do, what you're not allowed to do before you buy in. If you buy in as an investor owner, for example, with the intention of undertaking Airbnb, but the scheme regulates short-term letting, to periods of not, less than 3 months or 6 months. You can't buy in with that intention and start bringing your tenants in on a daily basis. That would be in contravention of the rules that you knew about before. And unfortunately, pleading ignorance after the fact is not sufficient. It's not a sufficient offense. So you have to take active steps to actually find out what you're allowed to do versus not allowed to do. And very often owners say after the fact, this was my first buy into a community scheme. How was I supposed to know? I'm not a legal person. My estate agent didn't tell me. My conveyancer didn't tell me. It's not up to them. It's up to you as an owner. You have to know what the rules are, what the governance documents are. So that's another big one.
And it really is, quite a big one, Zelina. There's a question I want to ask you around the rules, because it's such a contentious one. I know I've heard of so many stories of different owners who've bought into a community scheme and there's a particular rule that they were probably not aware of and do something, and only after the fact do they have issues with it. And some of them want to find out, how can I have a say in having a particular rule changed? So that's certainly something that I want us to explore after this break. We're going to go for a quick break. To viewers at home, I certainly want to hear from you. When you first bought into a community scheme, were you aware of the different rules and regulations that that community scheme had? Or was it something that you learned after the fact? And if you're already now living in a community scheme, are you aware of what the rules and regulations of your particular community scheme are? Are you happy with the rules that you found in your community scheme? Or are there some rules that when you see them, you're just like, I'm not so sure about that one? Do share them with us. We want to hear from you. And of course, we're going to be going for a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to take your questions and comments and also look at the final tip for new home buyers who are going to be buying into community schemes. I also want us to look at what investors should be aware of when it comes to community schemes. A lot of investors are going to be buying into community schemes, and there are certain things that you need to be aware of before making that purchase about the community scheme that you're going to be buying into. We'll be back just after this. Welcome back to episode 97 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Uzamanto Khumalo. This evening, we're talking about the 4 tips for new property owners in community schemes. And I'm joined by Zelinda van der Merwe, the co-founder and director at TVDM Consultants. She is our resident community schemes guru. We've certainly had a number of conversations about community schemes. If you've missed some of them, do go back and get a nice refresher course, because there's so many different elements when it comes to community schemes that we're going to continue having this conversation. Now, before the break, I did say that, the one question that I wanted to bring up, which I know is something that a lot of us tend to find, is around the rules. And when it comes to the rules, I certainly want to hear from you viewers at home around which are the rules that you found in the community schemes that you've bought into that you thought this is terrible, and you only found out about that rule after the fact. And if you were perhaps about to buy a particular property and you did request for the rules, you saw this rule and you thought, you know what, I'm not even going to buy into that because I can already foresee that I'm not going to be happy with that one. Do share what that experience has been like for you in a community scheme. Now, Zelinda, one of the really big contentious thing is, of course, rules, right? And I think one of the questions that we actually previously received in one of our previous episodes was if you are asking us around having a say in when it comes to rules when you're buying into a new development. But I think what I'd like to find out from you is then, now you've bought into this community scheme, perhaps unbeknown to you, didn't look through the rules, or you didn't ask to, a copy of the rules. Now you're there and you find out that here are some of the rules, and perhaps you don't quite agree with maybe 1 or 2 of them. Is there a way that you can have an influence in the rules or rule being changed? And if so, what is it?
Yes, definitely. So it all depends on what type of community scheme you're in. So if it's a body corporate, again, it's management and conduct rules, and you can get sufficient support together from your fellow members to actually propose an amendment to the rules. Conduct rules need a special resolution of the members, 75%. Management rules need a unanimous resolution, so all of the owners. And if you're not able to achieve those resolutions, you are able to make an application to the Community Scheme Ombuds Service, who's able to take that decision on behalf of the body corporates. And then, of course, if rules are amended and the relevant resolution is obtained, the Community Scheme Ombuds Service reviews and approves those rules as well to make sure that they are suitable to the scheme, not in contravention of the Act, and of course can be enforced. Now, if you're looking at a homeowners association, it could be slightly different. If you are dealing with a non-profit company homeowners association, you have two different sets of rules, one that is made by the board and one that is made by the members. Again, you need to get a required level of support to change those. If you're in a common law association, it depends on what the constitution says. Same with the share block company, retirement development. So it all depends on the community scheme, but rules are not cast in stone. I like to call rules a working document, and the reason for that is that it deals with conduct of people, and people are interesting beings, and what we desire or want today is completely different to what we desire and want the next day. What is reasonable to one is completely unreasonable to another, and the entire time your composition of members and residents change, your rules have to adapt and cater for that as well. So it most certainly is a working document and most certainly can be changed.
And that's such an important one, I think, because understanding that rules can be changed, and understanding how they can be changed is also such an important one, because perhaps you're thinking, I'll go in, or you've now learned that these are some of the rules, and having a conversation with whether it's the trustees or the managing company, and getting a better sense of how to best navigate, those particular rules becomes an important thing. Although a caveat that I will put out there is we tend to find that owners typically don't attend AGMs, so passing certain resolutions does actually become relatively impossible, really. And so I do urge owners to attend AGMs, because you want to make sure that your investment, which is essentially your property, and whether you're living in it or you're renting it out, it essentially is your investment, because you're putting all this money in, that it's being well taken care of, and that the people who are running the community scheme are also doing a good job, that the plans that they have in place, you are in agreement with them, because the reality of it is there are finances linked to that. So it's not just about having a meeting and it's just an update on the state of affairs. The reality is that those states of affairs have financial implications for you as an individual. So attending them and being a participant really does help you, because you get to shape the way that the community scheme is run. And of course, to get more details on this one, I did mention earlier that you want to get yourself a copy of the property guide, and it is on chapter 4 that looks at the different types of home ownership. And this is where you can get a really good explanation on the different types of home ownership, so that even when you start viewing properties, you would have, of course, gone to privateproperty.co.za, and as you start viewing different properties, you're able to ask even the agents these types of questions. And I think more than anything, agents do sit up when a buyer asks these kinds of questions, because it isn't typically the type of questions that a normal buyer would essentially ask. So they then know that, okay, this person knows their stuff, and so you certainly do want to make sure that you understand as much as possible about this one. And of course, to get your copy of the property guide, you can go to www.thepropertyguide.co.za. Now, Zelinda, what is then that final tip before we move on to investor owners? What is then that final tip for new property buyers in community schemes?
Well, you actually took it right out of my mouth. You spoke about it now, and that is getting involved. So I think that's also a very important thing, and that obviously takes place once you have become an owner. So you're now a member of the community scheme. What now? And the best advice I can give is to get involved. And you don't have to be a resident owner to get involved in the management. You don't have to put your name up as a trustee or director to get involved. You can serve on a subcommittee. You can offer your guidance and your advice and your support to the trustees. If there's a massive project that's going on, painting or electrical work or whatever it might be, and you happen happen to know somebody, or your company offers those services and you can offer the body corporates a good deal at a good price. Those are the types of things that you can assist with. And very often people don't want to be in the limelight of being a trustee, or I think people can think of a couple of other words other than limelight, because it's not very often a very popular position to be in. And a lot of people like to be on the sides and, throw comments or throw stones and not really be on the receiving end of that. But it's so much more than that. And you don't have to be one of the 5 or one of the 7 trustees or directors to actually make a difference and to be involved. And that's one of the first things that I did in my very first sectional title scheme that I invested in. And there was talks about a special levy going to be raised, and that's a trustee decision. And I thought, gee whiskers, I can barely afford the bond payments, let alone an increase in levies and special levies. Let me actually become involved as a trustee to find out if this is really needed, and whether or not I can understand the basis for it. I didn't join to go and fight it and to make sure that it wasn't raised. I simply needed to understand where management was coming from. And very often people become trustees or directors because of a self-serving motive. They either want an application to be approved, or they want to get rid of somebody, or they don't like something that's going on, or they want something to be changed. But that's not a good reason to be a trustee. And the greatest thing for me to see is when somebody becomes a trustee, either for those reasons or simply to become involved, and they start learning more and more as the days go by, and they take their responsibility more and more seriously. So if you're really wanting to make a difference in a community scheme, if you're wanting to understand how the community scheme works, how this machine functions, getting involved in some or other level is vitally important in participating. You spoke about it's very difficult to get members to attend or be represented at meetings, and with high quorum requirements, it's exceptionally difficult. This morning, I was at a meeting that was actually adjourned because the first round, they weren't able to get their quorum, and the second time round, they weren't able to get their quorum, so they had to wait, and it was over Zoom, sadly enough. And the managing agent made a joke and said, oh, the bad weather today must have kept people away from the meeting. And I had a good giggle because I just thought, what else can you do to make a meeting even easier to attend and people won't attend it? In this particular instance, they weren't happy with the time of day or the day of the week. But you know what? You're not going to satisfy everybody. And if you're really wanting to get involved in the scheme, if you're really wanting to understand the management of it and have your voice heard, you will make a plan, or you'll send a representative, a proxy, to a meeting. So don't use the excuse of I'm too busy, or the rain's going to mess my hair, or whatever the excuses are. You need to make a plan.
Zelinda, it's actually funny that you mentioned that the second round meeting couldn't correlate earlier today for you, because I've got an AGM tomorrow and it's also over Zoom, and I can already anticipate that we're probably not going to have the numbers, and so we're going to be back the following week, same time, and we very likely won't have the numbers again. So it is really quite unfortunate that we're not having, AGMs are essentially happening, but we're not meeting quorum. I think we certainly do want to see more owners being very active in the community schemes. And even if, they're not playing an active role in as far as being trustees, as you were saying, or even joining a subcommittee, but at the very least, that once a year, attending that AGM, getting a sense of what's happening, being able to ask questions or make recommendations is, enough participation. And whether you have one property or a few, it really is one day in a whole year. Typically, it usually is less than 2 hours, to be quite honest. I think a lot of these things tend to go fast because we never correlate. And so the agenda, you kind of move through it very relatively quickly. So I do urge a lot of owners that the moment you do buy into a community scheme, at the very least, attend the AGM. I think that's kind of the really big first step that you can take just to get a better understanding of how the community scheme is run. Now, Zelinda, I did say earlier that I wanted us to talk about then investors who are buying into community schemes. Increasingly, community schemes, as we were saying earlier, are becoming more popular, and investors are also buying into community schemes. So they're not just buying, houses and perhaps partitioning them, but you're essentially buying into apartment blocks that are also community schemes. What tips would you give specifically to investors? Because I can imagine when we're investors, and this is something that I've seen, as much as we emphasize so much the importance of doing your research, running your numbers and understanding, it's very easy to sometimes feel probably overwhelmed that there's so many things you must find out, that this is one of the things that's very easy for you not to prioritize. I've certainly seen it quite a lot. I made the mistake earlier on in my property investment journey of not asking about this and not understanding, from the community scheme that I bought into, and I paid the price for it. So I think it really is one of those things that is very easy to miss because you're thinking, well, I'm not going to be living there. It's a community scheme. I understand what this levy is, and then you move on. So perhaps, what tips would you like to share with our investors in particular who are looking to buy into community schemes about what they should be aware of before they invest or buy investment properties in community schemes?
So some of the things we touched on earlier, and if you start first with the finances, you need to understand exactly what the levy is. You need to understand if there are any additional charges, if there's special levies, if the electricity and water consumption is included in the levy, or if there's separate meters, if it's prepaid, because you're obviously going to have to recover that from your tenant. So what type of charges there are. You need to have a look at the rules to see what type of tenant would be best suited for the scheme. Obviously, if there's a no pet rule, you can't go and allow, the lady with 10 cats to come and live there. Or if you only have one parking bay that's allocated, you can't take a tenant that has 2 cars or 3 cars. We spoke before the show about overcrowding, for example. You need to understand a 1-bedroom can only cater 2 people, or a 2-bedroom can only cater 4 people. And that is obviously all set out either in the rules or the municipal regulations. You need to find out whether or not the tenant works from home. Is that going to cause an issue? Running the business from home, is there going to be a noise disturbance? Are they going to bring clients into the scheme? You need to understand whether or not the scheme allows short-term letting. Does the contract have to be for 1 year, 6 months, 3 months? And that obviously is going to affect the type of tenant you're going to get as well. You need to understand the facilities. You can't market units for a tenant with a central DSTV dish and fiber and all that fun stuff if those facilities aren't there. Does it have the amenities that people are looking for, 24-hour security guards, parking, security, a swimming pool, that type of thing? You need to understand that. And then, of course, from a rule perspective, if you're going to have a naughty tenant, you're going to have to understand that in the cases of breaches of rules, there's going to be fines that are going to be placed on your account. Those fines are not going to be raised on the tenant, they're going to be raised on you as the owner. If you're going to have a rental agent, the rental agent needs to be aware of the rules. The rental agent needs to be in contact with the managing agent in the event of any disputes. So very often we deal with investor owners that want absolutely nothing to do with their property. They have the rental agent that is dealing with the tenant, the rental agent that is dealing with the issues surrounding the unit. And sometimes the body corporate has to deal with the owner. Sometimes the rental agent doesn't have the necessary authority. And, very often they have to step in and actually play a role. So, those are some of the things to look at as an investor owner. Obviously, the levies that you are going to pay is going to be in addition to the insurance and to the rates and all those fun things that start eating away at the profits of the rental. And very often when people go into arrears when they don't have a tenant, the excuse is, well, I'm not getting a rental income, then therefore I can't pay the body corporate's levies. And it doesn't work that way. Interestingly, through the community scheme ombud service, the body corporate even has the power to attach the rental that a tenant is paying in lieu of arrear levies. So it's very important to make sure that the levies are still being served irrespective of whether or not there's a tenant. So that's a big thing for an investor owner. So when you're obviously leveraging the unit, that you don't exceed what you're able to afford if you're in the unfortunate situation of not having a tenant, because it's not the body corporate's burden if you're not getting paid a rental and if your property is only investment property. Sometimes investor owners are also not interested in the nitty-gritty day-to-day affairs of the body corporate. So again, it comes to the being involved and at least attending the annual general meeting, like you say, knowing that you don't have to be a resident owner to be a trustee. You can be an investor owner as well. And even better, your tenant can be a trustee. So those are things to consider.
And of course, we are taking your questions and comments at home. We certainly want to hear from you. If you've ever bought into a community scheme, what were some of the rules that stood out where you probably thought, I was not particularly happy with this? Before purchasing, were you even aware that there are rules that govern a community scheme? And I certainly want to hear about some of the more ridiculous ones that probably did not work out. We've got a comment here from one of our YouTube videos, Prasenji Day, who says, South Africa, greetings from India. Very informative channel, ma'am. Trying to learn real estate enterprise in South Africa. It's very interesting. Thank you for allowing me to attend. It's a pleasure, Prasenji. And we really do hope that you get a better sense of how real estate is is and how it works in South Africa. And we've got a question here from one of our regular viewers, Zelinda Mwekezi Mukomane, who asked, how does one become a trustee and do they get paid?
Interesting. So a trustee can actually be paid. You're obviously reimbursed for your expenses. So if you're doing a lot of printing or making a lot of telephone calls or using your petrol, you get reimbursed for that. If you are a member, in other words, an owner of a unit in the body corporates, it needs a special resolution of the members to actually authorize a payment other than a reimbursement. So a payment for your services as a trustee, and that would be a salary, for example, or compensation. If you are a non-member trustee, in other words, a tenant, for example, or an outsider, it would simply need to be included in the budget of the body corporates and approved by ordinary resolution. So you most certainly can get paid. Of course, as an owner and as a trustee, you can also be the managing agent, or you could be a caretaker, and you'd be paid in terms of a contract, either a management agreement or a service level agreement or an employment contract. So that's from the payment side of you. As a trustee, you can either be co-opted as a replacement trustee during the term of office if somebody resigns, for example. Alternatively, you'll make yourself available through a nomination process, and at the annual general meeting, you'll get elected as a trustee. That's how it works in a body corporates and very often common law associations, homeowners associations. If you're looking at a non-profit company, homeowners association, you're looking at a director. In a share block company, you're looking at a director as well, which is slightly different. But it all comes down to a nomination and election process, normally once a year at the annual general meeting. But of course, that board can replace its members if and when the need arises. You can also become an alternate member. So in other words, you stand in for a trustee when they're not available or not able to take part in the decision making. And then, of course, like I said, you can offer services to the body corporate, for example, managing agent and caretaker.
Linda, I think we're going to leave it there this evening. This has actually been a really insightful one, especially if you're a new owner or you're looking at buying into a community scheme, but also for property investors, because I think this is one of those things that are very easy to miss when you're looking for investment properties. I know a lot of us are on the lookout for different kinds of deals. And some of them, of course, going to be in community schemes because you're thinking it's somebody else is already taking care of things like security and making sure that the common area is very well taken care of. So it is one of those, instances where you probably want to make sure that as an investor, you probably get a really good community scheme that you buy into that's well run, where you understand the finances, and of course to get involved. But I see that we've got just a few more questions coming in from our viewers at home. We've got one here from Glenn Regan, who asks, what is the recourse if trustees and the managing agent do not comply with an adjudication order?
So the Community Scheme Ombud Service adjudicators hand down adjudication orders that are final and binding and obviously enforceable. And if they do not adhere to it, the successful party, be it the applicant or the respondent, is able actually to go to courts, either magistrates court or high court, to make it an order of court. They would first need to go back to the Community Scheme Ombud Service and tell the CSOS that whoever the other party is not abiding by it, and they will give you a certification to go to court. You don't have to appoint attorneys. You don't have to go and stand in court in front of a magistrate or judge. It's a simple process of getting the CSOS adjudication order stamped to make it actually enforceable as a court order.
And I think, we definitely spoke about CSOS, the role that CSOS plays, and the type of matters that it typically adjudicates. I do urge you, Glennis, to go back to that episode that we had with Zelinda. It was quite insightful, and I think it looked at the different kinds of scenarios that you'd potentially find yourselves in, that I know a lot of us probably have also found ourselves in, where perhaps the managing agent or the trustees are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. CSOS is there for this purpose. I'm going to squeeze in this last one from Lona Makanga, who asks, can you change electricity supply to municipality in a complex as a body corporate?
Sure, that's a complicated one. The electricity supply should be from the municipality. I know in Johannesburg it works slightly different sometimes with private suppliers, but interestingly, the sectional title legislation does deal with service supplies and meters, and in most instances it requires an ordinary resolution of the members. So it's not something the trustees can go and do on their own. They would need to obviously go to the members with all the information and the cost implications as well, and that's dealt with in terms of the prescribed management rules under the Sectional Title Schemes Management Act. that is a bit of a complicated one. I think I need a little bit more information on that. So the viewer is more than welcome to give us a shout and we can see how we can assist.
And I think, what I'll ask, and this is probably more for the benefit of the property investors, because now we're dealing with electricity, is in the event where you're buying into a community scheme, and suppose it's body corporate, you're very happy with the financials, you've done your due diligence, and you've bought now this new property, and suppose it's prepaid, it's not prepaid electricity, so it gets billed every month, but you now want to change your particular unit to a prepaid unit. Is that something that you'd have to notify the body corporate about, or can you just go in and say, this is my unit, I'm just going to change this, make it prepaid? What would be the right steps for the investor? Because I think investors in particular tend to look for these kinds of things. A lot of us tend to want apartments that are already prepaid, but sometimes you'll find that they're not. Having a prepaid unit installed isn't that costly. So what's the admin then behind it when it is in a community scheme?
Yeah, it's a good question. We chatted about it briefly about what investors should look at. And, I mentioned that if the services are included in the levies or not, you'd obviously need to know in order to recover it from your tenant. And interestingly, if you're going to have prepaid meters installed, that requires a special resolution of the members of the body corporate taken on a 60-day notice at a special general meeting. And there's a lot of constitutional requirements to be fulfilled, as well as Rental Housing Act requirements to be fulfilled. It's quite a big step to take. Interestingly, in Cape Town, we've got, the amendment bylaws when it comes to water meters. And apparently in October this year, every single premises has to have meters installed for the measuring of water, which is obviously quite a mammoth task, and in some instances practically impossible. So a lot of these questions are coming up in our industry. The prepayment meters is not as big as it is in Johannesburg, but it most certainly needs quite a high level of consent. It's not a decision that the owner can simply make and then carry out. It's something that has to involve the body corporate and its members.
Well, Zelinda, we are going to leave it there. I know we're going to have you back on the show in the coming episodes. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. It was great as always.
And that was Zelinda van der Merwe, who's the co-founder and director at PVDM Consultants. We're going to go for a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to be announcing the competition winners to the weekly competition that we're running on our social media platforms. I know we've been running this one for the past 2 weeks. You definitely don't want to miss who the winners are going to be. We'll be back just after this. Welcome back to episode 97 of the Private Property Podcast. I'm your host, Uzamantungwa Khumalo. It is a time of the evening where we give away amazing prizes certainly to you at home. I think all of you know by now that I love giving away prizes, whether it's money, whether it's data, whatever it is. It really is one of my favorite things to do, especially on this show. I cannot wait until one day we're able to give away a whole house. I think that certainly is one of the things that I am looking forward to. Now, the competition that we're running on our social media platforms, we ask you to dream big, or rather not to dream at all. And we said we all aspire to reach certain property goals. We encouraged you to not only dream about your goals, but to see yourself in them. And we really did want you to visualize this as much as possible. We asked you to pick and share any home from our website and to tell us briefly why and what about the home makes it your dream home. And we said, we were giving away, of course, or what you stood a chance to win was that 500 Rand cash voucher to 4 participants who had shared their dream home. And we're also looking to give away lucky participants we're also rather going to be giving away data to other people who participated. And now you're probably wondering who are the competition prize winners, and of course the cash prize winners who are going to be walking away with 500 Rand each. And this is my favorite part. And it's the end of the month. It's the last day of August, so you're going to be wrapping up August with some new money. just in a little bit. And of course, our winners are Unsigi Nkleko, Rebecca Ori Crestwell, Farana Siddiqui, Olile Mabuza. And the house viewing winner that we've got is Hoso Hlumelo. Now, winners, we do ask you to please inbox us to claim your prize. Congratulations to all our winners at home. We certainly do love sharing with you great prizes that we have in store. Watch out for our latest competition. I did say that we have something special in store for you for our 100th episode. You do not want to miss what is up for grabs for the 100th episode. We'll be sharing that with you on tomorrow evening's episode. You certainly do not want to miss that one. Well, folks, it is a wrap from us here on the Private Property Podcast. It has been a pleasure to spend the evening with you. And of course, if you want to, continue the conversation on our social media platforms, do keep, going on. We definitely want to hear about those community scheme issues that you're having. We really love going through some of these issues. And I think more than anything, we'll bring up more guests to be able to help us navigate some of those. Like we're saying, that it is really one of those things that so many of us overlook and struggle with, especially when we find ourselves living in community schemes. We're back again, of course, tomorrow evening with episode 98. We are so close to episode 100. You definitely do not want to miss that one. We really do have something special in store for you. And well, I'm going to wrap it up this evening from me, Zamantu Nwakumala. I'm back again on your screens tomorrow evening at 7 p.m. Until then, as usual, hoping you're staying home and staying safe.
Hi, I'm Julia Chen. I'm a restaurateur living in the Cape Town City Bowl. My restaurant, Hallelujah, is situated right in the heart of the city. Over the last few years, the influx of young professionals has created so many new and exciting things to see and do. The rejuvenation of the city has been something really special to experience. There are some really beautiful suburbs in our neighborhood. Nestled below the iconic Table Mountain lies Oranjezit and Tamboerskloof, filled with unique and beautiful homes. There's such a young vibe in the city, with an incredible blend of diverse cultures catering to everybody's desire. Within the city, there are so many genuine and passionate people, and you'll find them in places like the Woodstock Exchange, offering everything from handcrafted works of art to a culinary experience hard to forget. For those who enjoy the outdoors, Lion's Head and Table Mountain are phenomenal places to explore. Living in the City Bowl has definitely given me my dream lifestyle, and this is my neighborhood.